Welcome back to The Heat. We're discussing the non-binding independence referendum in Iraq's Kurdistan. Let's get back to our panel right now. And Aykan, the Turkish president, has been using some very tough language on this issue. Let's take a listen to what he had to say.
Turkey has adequate strength and potential to tackle this kind of threat. We want this matter to be solved by peaceful means, but once that road is closed, we will not hesitate using our potential.
So, Aykan, listening to that, the question is, could this get into a conflict again?
Indeed, that is the case. On the one hand, this is mostly posturing and rhetoric aimed at Turkey's domestic electorate base. But at the same time, what we see with the escalation is, Turkey has military maneuvers with Iraq on the border, closed kind of the pipeline, the Habur border crossing, and we are seeing anti-Kurdish vitriol at unprecedented levels in Turkey. So my fear is that this posturing on the Turkish side could get out of hand and spill over to the Iraqi side into an armed conflict.
Namo, do you share those fears that that could happen?
Yes, absolutely. It is really strange. When you talk to Iraqi Kurds, they say Erdogan has seen us as friends. And, Erdogan is known as a leader who weeps for other Muslim causes, Palestinians or the Rohingya Muslims in Myanmar. Or he was saying that the blockade of Qatar by Saudi Arabia and its allies was inhumane, quote, and Islamic. That he's actually threatening Iraqi Kurdistan to do exactly the same thing. He says, I can turn off the valve. You guys can go hungry. Why wouldn't Iraqi Kurds be surprised to hear this?
Ismail, I want you to take a listen to what the president of the Kurdistan region of Iraq had to say. That's Masoud Bassani. Let's listen.
The partnership with Baghdad has failed, and we will not return to it. We have reached the conclusion that independence will allow us not to repeat past tragedies.
So here we hear Mr. Barzani saying that the partnership with Baghdad has failed.
Well, I think, whether we agree or disagree with President Barzani, but I think the partnership between Baghdad and Erbil has been breaking out not today. It's since 2003, and I think also maybe on 1991 when the Kurdistan region was under the protection of the United Nations, that no-fly zone and so on. So therefore, I think Kurdistan people are thinking about independence here. There is no doubt about it that everybody has ambition on having their own independent state. But the question is, what will happen next? I mean, yes, the partnership has been breaking out with Iraq, and now they don't look back to Iraq as part of Kurdistan as part of Iraq. What is happening next? I mean, international arena now is opposing, if not not supportive to the referendum and independence. They are rejecting the creating or establishing a state. I don't understand. The question is feasible to Kurdistan to be successful state if they, declare their independence today? Here is the question. I think in my perspective and geopolitical perspective, since there is, it is a block land state, there is no exit to the sea. Geopolitically, and it is surrounded by all enemies. Iraq will be enemy, Iran, Turkey, Syria as well. It would be very difficult for this kind of state to survive. And feasibility do they have the political, economic, and military powers to set up for their challenges?
Well, let me put that question to Goran. Goran, if the Kurds in Iraq, as well as in Iran, Syria, Turkey, achieve independence, will it be a viable state? Will it be feasible, as Ismail asks?
Well, I think if the Kurds from all parts achieved independence, it would probably be more viable than a Kurdish state in Iraq. But it's really a question of, obviously there's been a lot of talks about Kurdish aspirations for independence and how this is a long-standing issue. even further back than 1991, but it's really important to examine what's happened in the last few years, particularly, that's sort of led the Kurdish leadership to take this route. Since 2005, with the drafting of the Iraqi constitution, there's specific agreements that were made between the Kurdish political parties and the political parties in Baghdad and the rest of Iraq regarding, certain issues and conflicts, in Iraq. Particularly, one is the disputed territories, but there's a lot of other issues that were covered in the Iraqi constitution. And since then, at least 7 major articles of the Iraqi constitution have been violated. I heard the guest previously say that there may be up to 50, according to the Kurdish government, but certainly there are at least 7 that have been violated. And I think in 2013, it was really the culmination of this issue where when Prime Minister Nouri al-Maliki formed military militias outside of the control of the Iraqi armed forces, outside of the foundation of the Iraqi armed forces, and really don't report to the Iraqi central government. This was a huge concern for the Kurds. They saw this as a direct threat to them. The militias were oftentimes used to target Sunni Arab dissidents, but the Kurds were very aware that if this continued, that they could be next. And I think this is part of the fear that has sort of driven the Kurds to move towards an independent option. And really, I think right now, the important issue here is that the Kurds and Baghdad come to the negotiating table, discuss their differences and see if they can come with a viable agreement.
Namo, the fact that there isn't much international support for this referendum, there's been opposition from the United States, from the European Union, from the Arab League as well. How much of an obstacle is that to Kurdish independence aspirations?
I mean, eventually, every state would need international recognition. Otherwise, you wouldn't have sovereignty and you wouldn't be able to conduct much international business. But I think the United States might adjust to the reality once Iraqi Kurdistan becomes independent. America doesn't have a lot of allies in the Middle East. The Kurds have certainly proven to be demonstrably pro-American, secular, liberal.
And the point that the Americans make is that this referendum is going to complicate efforts to fight ISIL.
Well, I think that is a bit exaggerated because today Brett McGurk, the presidential envoy for the coalition against ISIS, tweeted that cooperation between Iraqi army and the Peshmerga are ongoing to retake the last stronghold for ISIS, Hawija in Kirkuk, which is good news. I think Kurds have played their part in the fight against ISIS. They have liberated all of their areas, and they have helped liberate some of the Iraqi Arab areas, such as the city of Mosul. But the point I was trying to make on international legitimacy and recognition was that the United States initially, historically, has been opposed to all independence movements. Even in 1991, it was opposed to the breakup of the Soviet Union. The Chicken Kiev speech is very famous that George H.W. Bush gave at the time. He told the Ukrainians, don't separate from the Soviet Union. But afterwards, he recognized them.
Aykan, the one regional power that is in support of Kurdish independence is Israel. How do you explain that?
Now, I think Israel empathizes with the Kurds as an oppressed people looking for an independent state of their own. But in the short run, this seems to be making matters even worse because Turkey's reaction to the Kurdish referendum has been exacerbated by Israel's support. And President Erdogan threatened the Kurds, saying, waving those Israeli flags can't save you. So I think, again, in the mid to long run, what KRG needs, what Kurdistan Regional Government needs, is less such direct diplomatic support and more interlocutors, facilitators, meaning partners who can help Kurdistan build inclusive institutions, build stronger dialogue with regional powers. Unfortunately, for the time being, Turkey cannot be that power because Turkey, in the run-up to the November 2019 presidential elections, will continue to be held hostage by kind of catering to the nationalist voter base and Turkey hasn't done a great job in being kind of a moderate facilitator in such affairs. So I think Kurdistan desperately needs to find other facilitators in the region.
Ismael, very quickly, we just got a few seconds left, but clearly we've heard the will of the Kurdish people here, in Iraq at least, from this referendum. 93% voting yes. So what happens next?
This is a good question, in fact. I think if Kurdistan would like to go forward to declare independence, which I don't think so, that will happen within a few days. I don't think so also that the escalation of the situation between Iraq government and the KRG will be healthy for the both governments and both people, in fact, Iraqis as a whole. Just I want to go back to the confronting ISIS or the fight against ISIS. Yes, this is going to be divert the focus from our fighting against ISIS to eradicate ISIS. Yes, that will be, add more fragility, more fragmentation, and that wouldn't be for the interests of both Iraqis and Kurds.
Okay, we're going to have to leave it there. Thanks to all of you for being with us. That's it for this edition of The Heat. I'm Anand Naidu in Washington, D.C. Thanks for being with us.